Welcome to World Builders Anonymous. Kick that world building addiction and actually finish that novel with your hosts Vito and John.
Oh, wait. Gotta close the door. I didn't close the door.
That's what I have to deal with.
So unprofessional.
Should apologize to everyone right now.
I'm so sorry. My door was open and I hit the record button.
See that it does not happen again.
I'm sorry, Master.
Speaking of your gain, is your gain good?
My gain is exceptional.
I figured it was. I just wanted to say gain again.
You've been going to the gym, getting some sick gains.
Anyway.
All right. I got that bit.
Welcome, everybody, to World Builders Anonymous. It's just jarring right into it. Here we go. I didn't have a can to snap. I didn't have a little fancy song. With that, whatever that was, that sounded like. Well, let me guess.
Oh.
Was that a spoon rattling around in a glass?
In a metal cup.
In a metal
You're
cup.
very close.
That's very close. Yeah, that works. Okay. Anyway, we are coming fresh off of our week of thinking about our stories and kind of reconsidering our outline structures and plots. We've been talking a lot about getting back to a story after you've taken a break, how to overcome roadblocks in kind of enthusiasm / in inspiration, I guess, in your stories. And this was our week to kind of take and sort of dive back into kind of what our stories are all about, the roots of it, the foundation, and hopefully build that up a little bit more so that we can get some more momentum going forward with the actual writing of it. How I have some thoughts I've written down. How successful was this week for you in that regard, John?
Somewhat. Just in that it did get in there and do kind of what I wanted to do. I'm not quite there yet in terms of what I wanted to outline. Largely, there's 2 chapters I want to get solidly outlined to where I feel like I can write them a little more so. And I kind of got one done, and we're going to jump into the next one and do that. But then I feel like I'm going to be good to go to write some more.
Nice, yeah. I ended up having some difficulty with the plotting again in the chapter outlines, simply because I still don't feel like I have a very clear vision of where I want to go with the story. So I ended up kind of going out in a bit of a roundabout way, trying to do the same thing that we talked about last week, which was my roundabout way, I guess, was to incorporate a couple other influences, ideas that I'd had for theme, I guess, and setting in a way that will definitely add to the sorts of things I want to happen in the story, just in terms of inspiring events that I think could be cool, or add to the story. Specifically, I kind of was thinking about to update everybody or remind everybody, my story is based on a historical event, a revolt in Sicily in the 1200s, I think, or 12th century. I think it was 12th century. And I've kind of been floundering around a little bit because turns out basing your story on one historical event doesn't really give you an entire, story.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good starting point, but it doesn't really give you what the characters are doing in the midst of it, or where they're trying to get to, or their arcs and that kind of stuff.
Surprisingly enough.
It's a great starting point and a great, kind of diving board to, get into a lot of other good ideas. But I think I was expecting it to, be a little bit more intuitive coming up with a story based on it, and it hasn't been so far. And the outlines there, the macro events of the world are there, the takeover of, the, whatever analogous power is to the French in my world, and then they get kicked out, and then the Spanish come in and that kind of stuff. But, that doesn't tell you what the main characters are doing or what they feel or what their, struggles are and that kind of stuff, specifically in the midst of all that. So a lot of the ideas I've been coming up with have been inspired by a couple documentaries I've seen recently, and just, in past studies I've done of Irish history, actually. For those who don't know, I'm an Irish musician, not from Ireland, of course, but I play Irish music a lot, and have been kind of in that world, in that scene, I guess, here in Los Angeles for the past 5 years or so. So I've been around a lot of Irish people, done a lot of research on Irish things. I get really into, whatever I'm into, I get really into it. So it's really fascinating, Irish history, and there's a lot of parallels actually with Sicilian history in a lot of interesting ways. They're both islands. They have similar cultures in some ways, I guess. They are both have their own language, their own unique, isolated culture, as opposed to the main part of the country they're technically a part of or have been a part of. The UK in Ireland's case, or Italy in Sicily's case. Their own unique identity, and somewhat similar history of being taken over by foreign powers, it turns out, and rebelling over and over again.
That happens a lot.
It tends to happen a lot.
Not sure why.
So I've taken a few cues from that and kind of gone in more of a IRA kind of direction. Irish Republican Army.
There you go. So you don't
totally. I was thinking the same thing.
I didn't know if you were going to do that.
Totally, yeah. And thanks,
Okay.
though.
That was weird.
Right. Because, that was a little bit weird. It's fine. Don't worry about it. But in this, the historical narrative of the Sicilian revolt I base my story on, there's no, main group that's doing things. There's no, organized resistance that most people kind of talk about. I'm sure there was in many cases in those events, but it's not part of the historical stories I've found that describe that period of history in Sicily. Whereas the Irish history, in particular the 20th century, is full of those things. With the IRA, with I'm going to butcher this pronunciation because Irish is hard. Sinn Féin.
Oh,
I think it's what
it
it's
hurts
called.
to hear you struggle so much.
I know. I apologize to all 2 Irish people who listen to this podcast.
Both of you.
But yeah, anyway, incorporating that other sort of influence has been kind of unlocking some ideas in my mind, at least. And if your story is based on a certain event or a certain period, specifically in history, it could be good to kind of mix that with something else. And even if it's something similar in history, that can give you some kicks in the pants in terms of thinking of ideas and plot structures and stuff. So I'm kind of modeling one of the factions more on sort of an IRA model than, kind of a generic peasant rebellion model.
Yeah, right.
So, and the more specific you can get with that, the better, because generic peasant revolts are kind of like having, despotic kings in your story. It's just kind of like, okay, it's another
Of course there is.
tyrannical king. Cool, I guess.
Of course there's a wise old dragon who helps the hero.
Exactly.
Of course there is.
Yeah, I mean, that works, I guess, too, but yeah, I don't know. It's not very inspiring when you're trying to think of a story. Anyway,
Right.
So that's something I was doing this week. I was also thinking about another thing a lot this week in going back and looking at those things I've already written, this story and previous attempts. And then I also picked up a few other books and was looking at specifically the beginnings of the chapters, books I've read in the past and really like. And I noticed that I tend to write in a very zoomed in kind of narrative distance, whereas a lot of the books that I've been looking at, not all of them, of course, there's a lot of variation depending on the story and, what the author's trying to do, but most of them seem to be way more zoomed out than I am, especially in the beginnings of their chapters. You get kind of an introduction almost to the chapter, rather than starting right in the middle of action and then describing every time the character lifts a fork to their mouth and then chews and then looks at their brother out of the corner of their eye and then says something, and then the brother looks at them out of the corner of their eye and says something, and then he gets up and then he walks around and does, everything's very specific. We're seeing every little detail, especially from a character's point of view, whereas a lot of those things can be not glossed over but kind of summarized.
Well, you can leave some of it to the reader's imagination.
Yeah, a lot of, and that's in the even if you're in a scene where you need to be very zoomed in, but in general, when you're starting a chapter, it seems like the reader's going to forgive a little bit of zoomed outedness. to coin a phrase. For example, I was reading one of the books that I picked up this week, and it was something to the effect of. The week passed and my wounds healed and I did this, and then this such and so went home, and they're kind of describing events in sort of a summarized way before you get into the zoomed in kind of moment to moment detail of what's happening in the scene. And I don't let myself do that very often. We were talking a little bit beforehand that you don't either. Yeah, and it's hard to trust the reader to kind of forgive that, I guess. I tend to feel like I need to explain every little thing and kind of micromanage their visual that they're experiencing, especially. and their sensory experience, I guess, of the scene, and I feel like maybe we've been so bombarded with the show don't tell thing, don't tell what's happening, show what's
Right.
happening, that we've kind of gone too far in that direction, and we don't really tell anything. We just try to
Right,
show
right.
every single little thing. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, and there's another side to it as well. And this is, I find myself wanting to do more of the zoomed out stuff, and I don't necessarily know how all the time. Like,
yeah, it feels very
it-
impersonal when you write it.
it feels impersonal, and even more than that, it just feels, I don't know, it's a different muscle almost, and it's one I haven't used very much, and so I don't know when I can put it in there and get away with it.
Yeah, when it's appropriate. Yeah,
When it's appropriate, when it works, and how to word it also. I don't know if saying "and the week went on" is enough, if that's enough of a
Totally.
transitionary, phrase to get the reader to know what you're going for, or if you should invest a paragraph in explaining the expansion of time, but then if you do that, you're kind of just defeating the purpose anyway.
right. Yeah, totally.
It's tough to know when to be wordy with that and when to kind of just let the reader understand what that means. And I think I need to do some reading of just books I like and see when they do that effectively and how they do it. In The Lies of Locke Lamora, the book I mentioned quite frequently because it's very good, a lot of his chapters will start with sort of a description of the environment they're in, but he does it in such a way that it sometimes will pass some time. It'll tell a story. It'll explain something that's going to be useful later. Like, he does so much with his chapter openings, but it seems like very frequently those chapter openings that do so much for him are not actually in the moment with a character. He manages to do a lot zoomed out and in passing time that way. So I think it's a really important thing to get down, and it's one of the main things I know that I need to work on.
I wonder if part of it, I was thinking about this earlier too, I wonder if part of it is a problem of not having your narrator's voice down very well.
I think that's a big part of it.
I mean, I know I don't have that in my head very well yet for this story in particular, and in general, it's difficult for me to think of what the narrator should kind of not sound like, but kind of not even who they are, because they're not necessarily a person all the time, but it is like the reader's window into the story. Like, are you writing as the writer? Are you writing as kind of this like, passive observer, just kind of, relating the events of the story? Are you another character who's recalling this, all that kind of thing? And I think with something like The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, which we also reference often, he's writing from the character's perspective, but he's also, it goes back and forth between kind of a third-person account of the main character in the present day and a first-person recollection that the main character is relating to the reader of past events. And so that gives the narrator a very definite voice in those past tense sections or those past sections.
Right.
But even in the present sections where everything is in third person, there's such a voice to that narrative, that writing, that you can kind of, I don't know, imagine that there's somebody telling you the story, even though it's not really a character that's doing it. And I wonder if having that voice clear in your head would help with those sorts of problems in terms of how to tell the story and when
like
to zoom out and zoom in.
asking yourself who's telling the story, essentially. Like,
Kind of, yeah.
Not necessarily in a literal sense, but like, what is the tone I want to set with the narration?
Right.
Because the thing is, and this kind of hits the nail on the head, I think, and this is why the narrative voice relates to the zooming out or the passage of time or what have you. Essentially, when you're writing the actual events and whatever minutia, Darren walked into the hallway and saw Barnabas sitting at his desk, whatever. When you're doing that kind of stuff, that's not narration. That's telling of events, and that's an important thing to do in a book, obviously, because if any good book is generally made up of a lot of events, and you need to tell them. The narrative voice comes in when when you do zoom out, and you are not just saying actions. You're saying a summary of things, but someone is summarizing, essentially. You're not describing what's happening in the moment. You're in a more open-ended way, leaving stuff to the imagination of the reader, but as you go, you're also you have to do a lot of things. I don't know exactly how to put it. I hope it makes sense what I'm trying to say, but the narrator has to pass that time and make it seem as though it fits in. And so you have to have your narrative voice and the tone of the narration down in order to kind of zoom out and know how to handle those transitions and handle those broader, less specific periods of your writing.
Yeah, and know what to include, what not to include, how to tell it, that kind of stuff. Another part of this sort of another side of the same coin, I guess, is not knowing how to convey character thoughts when you're writing in third person, because I am writing in third person. I believe you are too. And oftentimes it's hard for me to relate what a character is thinking, or slash, to tell the reader something about the character. For instance, I was just writing a little bit earlier this morning in a scene, and I was writing, what was it specifically? I think I had said something like, so-and-so had never been very good at subtlety, and he knew it. I think was what I literally wrote. Not so-and-so, the character name, whatever. But anytime I write something like that, a big part of me is like, is this does that work? Is that the way I'm supposed to do this?
A little on the nose, maybe? I don't know.
Is it on the nose? Is it telling too much? Should I show that he's never been very... And I get all up in my head about it. Exactly, yeah.
Just keep asking yourself.
Totally, exactly, that kind of thing. Not knowing exactly what voice to put that in, essentially.
Right.
And I guess this could be another way to kind of, not get around, but kind of mitigate that problem a little bit at least. Another angle to approach it from, I guess. You know what I'm talking about?
Right. And I think, the thought I had just floated straight out of my head. Oh, I was going to say, and that also, to bring it back a little bit to our main theme of the show, that question might not even be worth asking right now. Like if you say he was never very good at subtlety and he knew it, that's good enough for now. Like as long as that's what you're trying to imply, and you can make that a little better later on. Like that's another one of those things where it doesn't necessarily need to be something you focus on right now,
Well, it was relevant to the scene. Like he was he was having to deal with somebody who was kind of, not being annoying, but somebody who was at odds with him in this current situation he was in. And he was having to basically decide whether to kind of be subtle and kind of tease out the conflict a little bit and examine it a little bit more, or whether to just face it head on and just sort of get into a full-blown argument with this person. And so it was very relevant to what was happening, but I didn't know whether to just dive into him actually doing that or to kind of preface it with this
I see what you're saying.
almost outside observation, even though the character himself could have thought of that in that moment, and been aware of that, even if they didn't oftentimes you think of something but it's not like in words, you just kind of realize something and then you kind of put words to it, but of course you can't see the character doing that in the story, so that could be what that is, I guess. I don't know. It's hard to know. And that's the sort of stuff I get up all in my head about, and then it paralyzes you in a scene. And it's no fun.
Right.
Yeah. But, I felt like this week was good in terms of kind of working through that a little bit mentally and realizing that I don't really want to go back and detail every single event that's happening in this story. I want to kind of continue to push my way through what I have so far, incorporating these other elements a little bit, because I'm having a lot of ideas for scenes that I'm writing down that I think are going to fit in very well with the rough structure I've had. Based on a lot of the ideas I had this week. And I want to kind of continue to pursue some of those, maybe jumping around in time a little bit, and pursuing some ideas I have, and kind of improvising a little bit more.
Yeah.
Still working towards that final product, but I think this is going to be more productive for me than sitting down and really making myself decide every single 27, every single scene is going to be in that 27, I guess, beat structure.
27
that
acts.
we talked about. Because I still have that thing I wrote down, that 27 beat structure, in very rough terms for some of them.
On paper.
Yeah, it's still a rough outline, a rough guide for me. It is on paper, yes. But it's still there. I can still use it. A lot of these ideas are fitting in very well with it so far. I'm just kind of discovering it as I go a little bit in some ways and changing it here and there. So, and I think that's okay. I'm still working towards it,
Yeah. It's a lot.
Yeah, I know. It's hard to know how to do this. Writing is hard, man. It's really hard.
It's like eating an elephant, but you don't know which bites to take first.
That is a way to put it. That is for sure.
You get it, right?
Yeah.
You eat an
Totally.
elephant one bite at a time, but in this case, you don't know which bites to take when.
Should I bite the trunk first? Should I bite the ear first? Should I
That's the question.
kill the elephant before I try to eat it? That's probably best too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the most humane way to
Maybe
do
I
it.
should just leave the elephant alone and go get a hamburger instead.
I mean, you could do that. What's that? Where does that fall in the analogy?
Yeah, what is that?
I don't even
mean?
know.
What does that
What's the
analogous
hamburger
to?
here?
Buying a book and reading it, I guess.
Let's sure. Let's go with it.
Anyway,
Elephants aside.
elephants aside. Yeah, that was kind of my week, though. I'm
Yeah.
still working to carve out more hours to write. I was more successful than usual this week. I had a little bit of time.
Yeah.
My wife and I are pretty busy right now working on some projects and some plans we have for next year. But we're finding some time. And then I know you're pretty busy right now too with Christmas coming up. We're gonna be leaving December 19th. I know for our trip with her family. My wife and I. So we might not get to a podcast that week, but we will be back to it in the new year for sure. And next week we should have another one, right? What is next week? Next week's the 17th.
17th.
So I'm pretty sure we'll have another one next week as well.
I think so. Yeah.
Yes. But anything else to add, John?
I don't think so. I mean, I had a less productive week than you, I think, but it was partly because I wasn't trying to get any writing done. I was trying to more focus on outlining a couple specific chapters, and I'm still working on that. So we'll see.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, I was working on that kind of at first, but like I said, I ended up having more success brainstorming through a few ideas I had kind of organically than I did with that. So that's kind of the path I ended up pursuing because it ended up being more productive and flowing better. So I'm going to continue that this week and probably working on a couple scene ideas I had as well. And kind of go from there. So we'll see how it goes. We're still working on this. The easiest way / most effective way to write a novel is definitely not self-evident, and definitely depends on your personality, your idea, your schedule, all those sorts of things. So it's quite a balancing act.
It's just like eating an invisible elephant.
Okay,
Put that on a postcard.
Available on T-shirts very soon.
Available at what's our podcast called? worldbuildersanonymous.com/t-shirts.
It is not, but
It's not true. It's not true.
Oh, actually, no. Go to that address. Go to that address whenever you're listening to this, and maybe we'll have made a link for it. You never know.
I'll tell you what. If you find a way to send us $1,000, I will send you a T-shirt that says, "Writing a novel is just like eating an invisible elephant." That is a guarantee.
That is quite a guarantee. Anyway.
Sorry.
Anyway, you can find us for real on Instagram and Facebook at World Builders Anonymous and at our website worldbuildersanonymous.com. And I always forget our email address. What is our email address, John?
I'm gonna let you try.
Is it wba_podcast@gmail.com?
That is our Reddit handle.
Oh, okay, that works too.
Take away the underscore and you got our email. wbapodcast@gmail.com.
Oh, I never know if there's underscores or not. I don't even know what the point of an underscore is. Just use a dash. It's fine.
The coder in me is angry.
I was going to say the coder, yeah. He's just like screaming internally
It's
right
fine. Repressed rage.
Screams in coder.
Before I forget, there wasn't a question for you guys to get back with us on this last week because I got busy and forgot again. However, this week, the question is, let's put it this way. I want to know your, not your favorite novel necessarily, but the best written fantasy novel that you know of, that you've read and enjoyed. What's the best written one? And if you want to go a step further, how did they handle these zoomed out things in the passage of time? Can you remember kind of the way it read and the way it flowed? Was there something special about that? The narrative voice, that kind of stuff. If you want to get back with us on that, reach out to us on any of our social media or email, what have yous.
Are you talking about like the maybe the fantasy novel that a literary fiction aficionado would most likely enjoy, perhaps? Like something that's
not necessarily
from that perspective?
I think that The Name of the Wind might be the best written fantasy novel
I would agree with that.
And there's obviously a reason why it's the best written fantasy novel. And I think part of that is the way these kinds of things are handled. And so I want to know what the good people out there may think about that topic.
Okay. So we're not talking in terms of necessarily technical proficiency, whatever that is. We're talking more in terms of how effective was the writing in terms of conveying the author's vision to the reader, I guess.
Yeah, it's a subjective question of kind of which book had the writing that flowed the best to you, that made you want to read more. And my theory is that there's a correlation between that and something about the way they handle these kinds of things, because I think that's a big thing that helps the flow of your novel.
That makes sense. Okay.
You can email us a response or find the question on Reddit. This, I guess, is going to go in the fantasy fiction subreddit, probably. Excuse me. My throat just imploded. Fantasy Writers subreddit. You can find it there in the next couple of days and respond there, or reach out to us directly.
Yeah, I don't have to look it up, though, John. You know why?
Why is that?
Because I already read it.
I'm out.
He just leaves.
I'm out. I'm leaving.
Okay, everybody. Thanks for listening. Bye.
This show is sponsored in part by Audible. Visit worldbuildersanonymous.com/audible to check out what the guys are listening to right now and to receive a free audiobook.